So as he says, my name's Andrew Willis. I'm going to give a brief overview of Vue.js. So basically, we'll start off with a brief history. So Vue.js was created by Evan You a few years ago. I don't know if many of you heard of it when it was first released, but it quickly gained a lot of momentum on things like Hacker News, stuff like that. Evan was a former Google and Meteor employee who started building Vue.js while he was at Google. When he was working at Google, he was working a lot with, obviously, their UX products, and he found Angular was a bit too opinionated and unsuitable for a lot of the larger projects, smaller projects they were doing. And so basically he wanted to build something which could be used for smaller projects and grow with the project, as opposed to needing to build a full single page application. So it'll be less opinionated than Angular and to grow with the project. I jumped ahead there a bit. So what is Vue.js? Well, on the Vue.js website, it describes itself as a progressive JavaScript framework. So what really does that mean? And what that means is that Vue.js is an adaptable framework. It's suited to a variety of different use cases. And like I said before, it can grow with your project from having one small interactive component on a page through to having a full page of nested components, maybe independent from each other or maybe interacting with each other. And you can basically use it, like use the same style of component all the way up to building a single page app. So why do I use it? Well, I'm primarily a back-end developer. And so when I'm like having to work with the front end, one of the things that I really need is for it to be really quick to get what I'm wanting to get done. So the reason I used Vue.js is because it doesn't matter what type of front-end application I need to build. It's like Vue.js's components can be used for, like I said before, the smaller applications and the larger ones. So you don't need to have like a massive architecture for a single page app from the start. Although if your app does grow into that, then it is capable of doing that, and it's capable of doing that without making major like changes to the components that you've written. So Vue.js is started with we'll start with the Vue instance, just to give an example of how easy it is to get started with Vue. I don't know how well you can see that. But it's basically when you create a Vue instance, you specify in the JavaScript what the element is, like here, and you set the data which gets passed through these. You pass the data through there. Went the wrong way. A similar sort of thing is when you're making components. So when you build a component, you basically build the component with you can build it with the template inside of a Vue file. And you basically build it as a fully contained component. And what the export on the script there, what that's returning is basically really similar to the Vue instance component. And importing components into your Vue instance is really simple as well. You just set it as a component and then use it inside your app by doing the it's pretty much like that, yeah. Then again, after that, you can build up your component to have inputs with bound variables. You'll notice on the value there's the colon before value, which tells it to pull that from the data. Not property, it's a function there. It pulls the value from the data. And also that changes the value if you change it in the input. Obviously that's done via the update method there, which is fired on the input event, which you set up with the @ symbol. You can also use the v-bind instead of just the colon. So you do v-bind colon value, and you can do v-on instead of the @ symbol, but they're just kind of shorthand for them. The v-on modifier has, so the v-on attribute has modifiers such as .stop, so you could go @input.stop, which will stop propagation, or you can do .prevent to prevent default, and if you only want the event to fire once, you can do .once. It's pretty simple. We also have, I don't know if you can see there, computed properties, which are properties that obviously get computed based on what's in the method there. So what that's doing is it's obviously getting the length of the greeting and printing it in the span there. So as you type and change the values there, it will change the length to whatever the length is you've put in that instance. Yeah, so we can also then nest components into components, so you can have a smaller component inside your component. This is pretty much exactly the same as putting a component in the Vue instance. You simply, on your larger component, you specify that you're having a smaller, but I call it smaller component here. You don't have to call it anything really. Well, you have to call it something, but not. And when you put the component in, down here, you can like place that component inside of your template by just doing, I'm selecting too much of that there, kind of like that. There's also things like properties and attributes you can set on the components which I haven't really touched on here, but they're you can pass properties through components and you can access them in your script with a attribute called props, and you can do some simple validation there, or you can add extra validation rules if you want. It comes with some basic ones like alphanumeric and stuff like that. So Vue.js, the ecosystem, there has a lot of plugins and resources such as Vuex, Vue Router, and Vue DevTools. I'm going to talk about them briefly in a moment. There's also some unofficial ones like Vue Resource, Vue Validator, Vuestrap. There's two types of Vuestrap now. There's Vuestrap and I think there's Vue Boot. One of them is using jQuery. Vuestrap isn't using jQuery, so I prefer Vuestrap. The guy who did that has written all of the jQuery functionality in native Vue components, so it's like pretty good. You find a massive curated list of like all things like that and tutorials. There's example code and everything at the Vue.js Awesome Vue repo on GitHub. So if we talk about Vuex, it's basically the idea behind Vuex is that your components in Vue.js should be independent of each other. And so what Vuex allows you to do is manage the state of your app between the components. I don't know if any of you have used Vue before, and before Vuex was around, what you much had to do in order to get data from one component to the other was fire it off through an event, and then if you had nested components, you had to listen in each component all the way down the nesting, which was an absolute nightmare. And then if you missed one little thing, one problem, it's really difficult to debug as well. But what you ended up doing was writing an event listener to manage that externally from the components. But then Vuex came along, and you can also abstract persistence away from your components with Vuex. So when you update something in a component, instead of accessing the HTTP layer directly in the component, you can access it in the Vuex in one of the methods there. And that makes it a lot easier to test the components as well, because you're not relying on the HTTP layer for anything. So yeah, Vuex is inspired by Flux architecture, which is basically a unidirectional database architecture. It can be as simple or as complex as you need for your use case. So if you just need a simple like store to manage a couple of little things, you can have it in one store file. Or if you need like a massively complex interaction between multiple components and pages and like keep everything in sync across many things, you can like basically spread it out across multiple files. And yeah, kind of got lost there a bit. So Vue Router is basically it's Vue's routing package, which it classes each page as a component. So like the components we've just seen. It is mainly used to build single page apps. You can use it to build like a section of your app that you want to have like a couple of pages on, but like that is a single page app in itself anyway. So a really, really simple example is like this, for instance. See, we have the Vue Router, and we're importing the page, which is a component. We create the router with the routes. We have the path, some page, the component, some page, which is from there. And then we create the new Vue instance with the router and mount it on the app element on the page. In the on the page, in the page HTML, we have I've created the app element here. You can create router links, which you tell it where to link to, which will obviously take the path. You can also do named links by passing through objects and things like that, but obviously it's a lot to cover. You can also specify that the router link becomes a specific type of element. So if you're making a list, or you can give it its own little, you can give it its own templates and stuff like that. So it's really flexible. And whatever you have in that component gets put into the router view element there. That's basically, yeah, you can have like more elements on the page and just have the router portion of the page. The next thing is Vue DevTools, which allows you to see and modify your active Vue components. So here I have an example of Vue DevTools. It's on a really, really simple component. So it's basically an example. If you change any values here, it will update them on the page. And it also allows you to access the elements. If you have like a list of elements here, if you're using Vue Router, you will have all of the like links there. You'll have the router Vue instance there with all of the properties and everything that's set there. You can also, using the Vue DevTools, like it works with Vuex, as you can see there. It basically allows you to click through and see what the state of the application was at different times. So when you're going through a certain flow, you can click through the Vuex state modifications, and you can see if there was a bug at one point which hasn't set something or something's not went correct, you can see where that actually happened, which is really useful. I know I've used it a couple of times, but I couldn't find an example in time for the talk. So yeah, basically that's a brief overview of Vue. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
You say it's less opinionated. What do you mean by that?
So Vue basically you can use it for like you can use you can use it with other frameworks and things like that. So you can use it with or without jQuery. I suppose it's kind of like an inversion of being opinionated. Yeah. Yeah. Did anyone else? Yeah.